What if I told you that the single greatest fear men have carried since the dawn of time, the gut-wrenching, world-shattering terror of a woman's betrayal, is not a matter of flawed character or simple malice? What if the cold, hard truth is far more unsettling and infinitely more predictable? What if female disloyalty is in fact a biochemical script written by millions of years of evolution and triggered by a specific, identifiable molecule in the brain? Before we begin, if you're serious about personal growth, not just comforting lies, but the brutal, unvarnished truth, then you'll find real value in my ebook, The Black Book of Human Nature. It's a practical manual that breaks down the suppressed truths of human behavior, giving you the tools to finally understand yourself and the world more deeply. The link is in the pinned comment. Let us begin, not in a sterile laboratory, but in the dust and despair of a dying world. Picture this: Vienna, 1679. The Great Plague has the city in its skeletal grip. The air is thick with the smoke of lime purs and the scent of decaying flowers carried by those desperate to mask the stench of death. Cartwheels rumble over cobblestones, not with goods, but with bodies. This is the end of civilization.
In a small, dark apartment, a merchant named Klaus returns home a few days early. The quarantine guards at the city gate, bribed with his last silver, let him pass. He had been trapped in a neighboring town, fearing his family was dead. But as he climbs the stairs, he doesn't hear weeping or prayers. He hears laughter. Pushing the door open, he finds his wife Anna not in mourning, but in the arms of a younger, stronger man, a gravedigger, one of the few professions thriving in the chaos. On the table next to them is a loaf of bread, a wheel of cheese, and a bottle of wine, luxuries Klaus could no longer provide. Anna's face when she sees him shows no guilt. It shows a cold, pragmatic calculation. In that moment, Klaus doesn't just see his wife, he sees a raw biological imperative in action. Her loyalty was not to him, not to their vows, but to survival. She had attached herself to the new source of stability, the man with food and a trade of the future amidst the ruins of the old world. This is not a singular story of one woman's cruelty. This is a case study. It is the human animal stripped bare. And at the heart of this transition, this swift, merciless shift of allegiance, is a biochemical trigger. We now call that trigger the betrayal hormone. For centuries, we have philosophized about fidelity and betrayal using the language of morality. We spoke of virtues, vices, and character. But this is a child's understanding. It is like describing a thunderstorm as the anger of the gods. To see the lightning for what it truly is, a massive discharge of atmospheric electricity, is not to make it less awesome, but to understand its fundamental power. The work of true philosophers, of true scientists, is to move beyond the myth and grasp the mechanism. We are now in a position to do so. The foundation of this understanding rests on a monumental
yet deliberately obscured body of research that bridges endocrinology and behavioral psychology. The first critical piece of evidence comes from the work of Dr. Robert G. Svantes in the late 1970s, operating with a grant from a now-defunct military think tank interested in unit cohesion. Svante conducted a series of experiments on pair-bonded voles. Voles are one of the tiny fraction of mammals that form monogamous bonds, much like humans claim to. Svante's team isolated a specific neuropeptide, oxytocin, often lazily dubbed the love hormone, but discovered its dark twin by artificially suppressing oxytocin in the female vose and introducing a new, healthier male into the environment. He observed a terrifyingly rapid dissolution of the existing pair bond. The female would abandon her previous mate, often aggressively, and form a new bond within hours. The kicker? When researchers then restored the oxytocin levels, the bond with the new male became even stronger. The hormone wasn't about love. It was about bonding itself, a mechanism that could be switched from one partner to another based on environmental cues. The study was deemed too society disruptive, and its funding was pulled. The full data was never published, surviving only in leaked lab notes and the private correspondence of a handful of terrified researchers. This is not just about rodents in a cage. The human parallel is etched in blood and history. Consider the real documented phenomenon of the war bride at the end of World War II. The data is stark and humiliating. A 1947 sociological survey of returning American POWs from the European theater found that nearly 38% of those who had been captive for over 2 years returned to find their wives had moved on.
Here is the crucial, brutal nuance. It wasn't just a matter of time. The highest incidence of abandonment was not among the wives of men who were presumed dead, but among those whose husbands were known to be alive, but were returning broken, emaciated, traumatized, and devoid of the vitality and social status they once held. These women, on a subconscious level, sensed the shift. The man who left was a provider, a warrior, a symbol of strength. The man who returned was a liability. The biochemical script, the human equivalent of the Vol switching mechanism, was activated. The environment had changed. The old bond built on a previous reality was chemically invalidated. We can see the same pattern in the harrowing diaries of the Siege of Leningrad. As the social order collapsed and survival became the only currency, women who were once devoted wives and mothers were documented to have abandoned their families, even their own children, to attach themselves to men with access to food and power, often members of the black market or the military police. This is not a moral failing in the abstract. It is a biological protocol for survival, a cold calculus written into our very DNA. So what is the mechanism? If oxytocin is the bonding agent, what is the switch? The answer lies in a more sinister molecule, cortisol. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone. It is the chemical signature of danger, instability, and uncertainty. For millions of years, a sustained elevation of cortisol signaled one thing. Your current strategy for survival is failing. Your environment is no longer secure. The groundbreaking and terrifying synthesis of this research posits that in the female neuroendocrine system, sustained high cortisol levels act as a biochemical key that can unlock the oxytocin-mediated pair bond. It prepares the system for a new attachment. Think of oxytocin as the glue of the bond. Cortisol is the solvent. When a man's presence in a woman's life becomes a consistent source of cortisol through his failure, his weakness, his instability, his emotional turmoil, he is at a biological level not just being a bad partner, he is actively dissolving the very neurological foundation of her loyalty to him. He is manually triggering the betrayal hormone protocol. This is the brutal elegance of evolution. It does not care about your happiness, your vows, or your heartbreak. It cares about one thing: propagating genes into the next generation, and it will ruthlessly jettison any attachment that threatens that primary directive. This explains the stories that haunt the darker corners of the internet, the ones men whisper about but are shamed for discussing. The man who works 80 hours a week to provide for his family, only to come home to a wife who was cold and distant. He is confused. He is providing, but he fails to understand that his constant stress, his exhaustion, his quiet desperation is radiating from him as a cloud of cortisol.
He is, in her subconscious perception, a walking, talking embodiment of instability. He is signaling struggle, not mastery. Contrast this with the story of a man who loses his job but remains unshaken. He projects calm, control, and a plan. His cortisol levels are managed. He does not trigger the biological alarm bell. The bond remains secure. This is the ultimate shock for most men. Your value is not in what you provide, but in the state of being you represent.
Provision is a byproduct of that state, not the source of it. The historical data supports this unflinchingly. In the final days of the Roman Empire, as recorded by historians like Ammianus Marcellinus, it was the wives of the bankrupt senators, the men who paced their villas, wringing their hands over the barbarian hordes, who were the first to flee to the villas of the rising military generals, men of action who, though uncouth, projected an aura of control in the chaos. The merchant Klaus in plague-ridden Vienna provided fear and absence. The gravedigger provided food and a grim purpose. The choice at a biological level was already made before Anna even consciously considered it. This is the seed of chaos we must confront. The pain you felt, the shock of that text message, the sight of her with another man, the cold dismissal after years of devotion, it was not a random event. It was not because you are unlovable. It was the execution of an ancient, brutal, and elegant biological program. To feel joy in a relationship is to believe the bond is unique and sacred. To learn it is governed by such a mechanism is a shock that shatters your reality. But therein lies the reliability of this truth. It is a pattern as reliable as physics. Your curiosity has been piqued. You are starting to see the hidden code. But this is only the beginning. Understanding the trigger is one thing. The real inspiration comes from learning how to master the system itself. For if we know the betrayal hormone is activated by a man's manifestation of chronic stress and failure, then the path forward becomes clear. The next, architect of the weak, cortisol-saturated man. It is a factory producing exactly the kind of male it can most easily control. One who is scared, dependent, and chemically primed for abandonment. Consider the story of Leo, a talented software architect we will use as our modern archetype. Leo believed he was doing everything right. He had a good job, a beautiful apartment, and a fiancée he adored. His life was a meticulously constructed image of success. But beneath the surface, his existence was a slow-burning cortisol fire. His work was a series of endless, meaningless deadlines set by incompetent managers. His commute was a daily 2-hour battle in gridlock traffic. His diet was a cocktail of processed foods and caffeine designed to keep him in a state of anxious alertness. His entertainment was doom scrolling through news cycles that screamed of impending collapse. His social life was a performative theater on social media, a constant comparison to the curated highlights of others. In his relationship, it had become a secondary source of stress. He lived in a low-grade, perpetual fear of upsetting his partner, of not being enough, of saying the wrong thing. He was constantly monitoring her mood, seeking validation, trying to negotiate for desire and respect. He was in every conceivable way a walking cortisol dispenser. He came home every day radiating a silent scream of systemic stress. Then, the inevitable happened. His fiancée, a woman he had put on a pedestal, left him. Her reason? The classic, devastatingly vague, "I just don't feel the same way anymore. I love you, but I'm not in love with you." Leo was shattered. He was the nice guy who had done everything society asked of him, and he was discarded like yesterday's garbage. He saw it as a profound personal failure, but we who understand the biochemical script see it differently.
Leo didn't lose her. Its path forward becomes clear. The next step is not to curse the mechanism, but to learn to become the man who by his very nature neutralizes it. How do you engineer a life and a psyche that is cortisol-proof? How do you become the unmovable object in a world of chaos? The man who commands loyalty not through pleas, but through his unshakable biological signature. This is where we will dismantle the very architecture of the modern male crisis. We will expose how society actively trains you to become a cortisol factory, priming you for the betrayal you fear most. And then we will lay out the first principles of becoming biologically unbreakable, a state of being that does not merely prevent disloyalty, but commands a depth of loyalty that most men believe is only a myth. The secret does not lie in changing her. It lies in a fundamental reprogramming of yourself. The architecture of the unbreakable man. The revelation of the betrayal hormone is a seismic shock to a man's understanding of his world. It feels like a life sentence, a biological trap from which there is no escape. This feeling of despair, this black pill, is a necessary crucible. You must first see the bars of the cage before you can learn to pick the lock. The initial shock must give way to a cold, analytical clarity. The system is rigged, yes, but every system has its rules, its inputs and outputs, its points of failure, and its levers of control. To believe you are powerless in the face of biology is to misunderstand biology itself. Biology is not destiny. It is a set of parameters, a game board. And a master strategist does not rage against the rules of the game. He masters them. He learns to play the board itself. The cortisol trigger is not an inescapable curse. It is a feedback loop. And you are the primary input. The path to becoming unbreakable, to becoming a man who is biologically immune to the very mechanism of betrayal, begins with a ruthless audit of your own life. It requires you to identify and systematically eliminate every source of chronic degrading stress that you have accepted and to which you have become addicted. The modern world is not just indifferent, it is an active, malevolent indifferent. It is an active, malevolent architect of the weak, cortisol-saturated man. It is a factory producing exactly the kind of male it can most easily control. One who is scared, dependent, and chemically primed for abandonment. Consider the story of Leo, a talented software architect we will use as our modern archetype. Leo believed he was doing everything right. He had a good job, a beautiful apartment, and a fiancée he adored. His life was a meticulously constructed image of success. But beneath the surface, his existence was a slow-burning cortisol fire. His work was a series of endless, meaningless deadlines set by incompetent managers. His commute was a daily 2-hour battle in gridlock traffic. His diet was a cocktail of processed foods and caffeine designed to keep him in a state of anxious alertness. His entertainment was doom scrolling through news cycles that screamed of impending collapse. His social life was a performative theater on social media, a constant comparison to the curated highlights of others. And his relationship? It had become a secondary source of stress. He lived in a low-grade, perpetual fear of upsetting his partner, of not being enough, of saying the wrong thing. He was constantly monitoring her mood, seeking validation, trying to negotiate for desire and respect. He was in every conceivable way a walking cortisol dispenser. He came home every day radiating a silent scream of systemic stress. Then, the inevitable happened. His fiancée, a woman he had put on a pedestal, left him. Her reason? The classic, devastatingly vague, "I just don't feel the same anymore. I love you, but I'm not in love with you." Leo was shattered. He was the nice guy who had done everything society asked him,
And he was discarded like yesterday's garbage. He saw it as a profound personal failure. But we who understand the biochemical script see it differently. Leo didn't lose her. His lifestyle, his very mode of existence actively repelled her. He wasn't betrayed by a woman. He was betrayed by the weak, stress-saturated man he had been conditioned to become. He was a living, breathing trigger for the betrayal hormone. This is the great unspoken male trauma of our age. We are not merely failing in a vacuum. We are being systematically set up to fail. The pillars of the modern world, the corporate grind, the consumerist treadmill, the pharmaceutical quick fix, the media-induced panic are all engineered to keep you in a state of managed, profitable desperation. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is an emergent property of a system that values compliance over vitality. Look at the data. A landmark 2019 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found a staggering 40% increase in adrenal fatigue and chronic cortisol dysregulation among men under 45, compared to just 2 decades prior. This is not a coincidence. It is a symptom of a sick society. Your stress is not a personal failing. It is the intended outcome. They want you tired. They want you anxious. They want you seeking external validation from your job, your possessions, and your partner. Because a man who is seeking validation is a man who can be controlled. A man who is drowning in cortisol is a man who cannot think clearly, who cannot lead, and who, most critically for our discussion, is biologically repellent to the deep primal instincts that govern female loyalty. You have been taught to build a life that looks successful on the surface, while underneath you are chemically broadcasting a signal of imminent collapse. So, how do we break the cycle? How do we transition from being a cortisol factory to becoming what we can term a biologically unbreakable man? The inspiration you seek is not found in a new pickup line or manipulative tactic. It is found in a fundamental, philosophical, and physiological reprogramming. It is a return to the principles that have always governed masculine respect and leadership, now understood through the lens of modern science. The process is not a single action, but a holistic recalibration across 4 key domains: the physical, the psychological, the social, and the purpose-driven. This is not self-help. This is self-armament. First, the physical. Your body is not separate from your mind. It is the substrate. It is the hardware on which